There's no going
So you
back.
can do what you wanna do. You can do what you wanna do.
Hello and welcome to day 17. Today we're going to be talking about underpainting, or in the old masters terms, Imprimatura layer. As you may know, the Imprimatura layer, as used by the old masters, was done in various forms of thickness. Sometimes it was a relatively dense color, sometimes they would put a very, very light wash of color. It depends on what they were looking for. But of course, in today's modern twist on things, we do all kinds of things with underpainting. I'm going to go through a couple of examples of what we can do with an Imprimatura layer, the fun that we can have with it, and then we're going to go through an exercise of actually doing an Imprimatura layer so I can talk you through the process. It's really simple. This particular painting is here because I wanted to show you an example of an Imprimatura layer that was used completely covered. It was used just to give the painting a warm underglow. This Imprimatura layer was just plain red. I coated the entire canvas in red before I started painting. And then when I was actually doing the painting, there were areas of it where I wanted the red to show through. So I chose red specifically because it complemented the color of the horse. If you have a look in the area here underneath his chin, you'll see that there's quite a lot of red coming through. But ultimately it was a burnt sienna color, and the red underneath it brought the warmth out from underneath. You can also see here in his throat area, there's quite a lot of the red showing through. So in those areas the paint is quite thin. But ultimately the Imprimatura layer was covered. We can, however, use our Imprimatura layer for all sorts of fun. Here is an example. This is a painting that you guys, I've got it low down because I'm focusing specifically on this area here. This painting, the Imprimatura layer was basically blue in various forms of thickness. Here it's very thin, so it's quite watered down, whereas here it's a little bit thicker, but it was the same layer. I left a lot of the canvas empty because I wanted the blue to be quite part of the composition. Okay, so you don't have to cover your entire Imprimatura layer. In this particular case, I didn't do blue under his face because I didn't want the cool tones to come through. I wanted his face to pick up the morning glow. This photograph that I painted from was taken one morning early at a farmer's market when I used to exhibit, and there was a young man standing busking, and I just enjoyed the way that the light was catching on the side of his face. And when I first saw him, it was from the back, so his hair was picked up beautifully. So I hovered around him with my camera. I asked him if I could take a picture. I mouthed at him, "Can I take a photograph?" And he nodded while he carried on busking, and which I did, and he made eye contact with my camera. And what I was trying to achieve here was the warm glow of the morning sun and the coolness of that same morning sun, that the combination of warmth and coolness. It was a winter morning. And there happened to be quite a lot of blue behind him. So the blue was picking up beautifully on the violin and of course behind him. So I brought that out in the Imprimatura layer. It became part of the narrative without actually being anything specific. So that's also a lot of fun you can have. This little painting is a portrait. Can you see it? There's a bit of a glare, so let me put it a bit forward. This little painting is a portrait of a friend of mine's daughter. As you can see, the Imprimatura layer is very loose. Just let the paint run down. I used a lot of purples. This photograph was taken by my eldest daughter. I used the underlayer to create a narrative around the features of the face more than actually tell a story. Okay, so that's also a lot of fun that you can have. This one here, this is a mother and child. Again, I'll pull it forward a bit. You can see my Imprimatura layer actually was two different colors here, with the burnt umber and with the burnt sienna and the burnt umber. Also leaving a bit of the canvas empty. There was quite a strong light coming from this side, as you can see, picking up on the mother and child's face. So this was to help suggest the light coming in from that corner of the canvas. I could have covered it all and it would have been a really nice composition otherwise, but I felt it was quite nice to play with the underpainting in this case. So there's a couple of examples of what can be done with an Imprimatura layer. Now what I'm going to do is take the camera and mount it up on the ceiling, open up the table, and we'll actually go through an Imprimatura layer on how to create it. See you in a minute. Okay, so here I am at my art table. I've got a little drawing board up in front of me here. My table is slanted, so I put this little drawing board up so I can get a bit of a flat top of the table to show you what I'm going to be doing next. I'm going to mix a color, and in this case I'm going to be using Viridian Green, but it can be any color. and whatever it is that you choose. In fact, it could be like a combination of colors, a bit like that painting of Roxanne, where I used a bit of blue and a bit of mauve and a bit of all sorts of colors. Before I carry on, I just want to talk about the difference between an Imprimatura layer for acrylic and an Imprimatura layer for oil painting. Now, your Imprimatura layer can be in oils or acrylic. There's a lot of artists that will tell you that your Imprimatura layer can only be in acrylic, and the reason that they believe that is because it is believed that acrylic paints have got far more adhesive power, because you can paint oil onto acrylics, but you can't do it the other way around. And the reason for that is that oil and water don't mix. And as long as you make sure that your acrylic Imprimatura layer is very, very well dry before you start painting oil on top of that, you can put oil on top of acrylic. You've just got to make sure that the water content is well evaporated out of it. However, it is not true that you can't do an Imprimatura layer in oils. And the reason that it is thought to be true is because oils, when you put too much terps into it, we need a lot of terps in this to make it very fluid, and when you put too much terps into it, you can destroy the bonding properties of the paint. Now, the way to get around that, I've talked about this in a video a couple of days ago, is to add a little bit of oil. You just need about 10% of your fluid content to be oil to return it to its bonding, give it back its bonding properties. Effectively, what you do by adding a lot of terps into it is you are destroying the molecular structure of the bonding properties of the pigment itself, and you're returning it back to its original state, which is a powder form. And then, of course, your canvas is effectively coated with powder, and anything that you paint on top of that is compromised. So the way that I counteract it is to actually mix a bit of my paint first with some oil. In this case, I'm using alkyd oil. You can use linseed oil or safflower oil or whichever of the oils that you prefer. Make sure you want it to be quite fluid, but not really, really runny. So it's kind of dripping off the palette knife. That should be about enough. And what actually helps, if you put paint straight into your terps, this is my terps here. And it's genuine terps or artist terps or distilled terps. It's not mineral terps. Please refer back to an earlier video where I discussed in the solvents and mediums the difference between the mineral terps and pure terps. Before I put the paint into the mineral terps, I mix it with the oil first. It doesn't really matter which way you do it. I just prefer to do it this way because if you put paint straight into the terps, it's quite difficult to get it to almost dissolve, and it can be a bit lumpy, so I like to soften it first with the oils and then add it to my terps. Now, I haven't put very much paint in here, so this is going to be a thin mixture, but of course if you want your paint to be a slightly stronger color, then you just put a little bit more paint into it. And then it's simply a case of mixing your paint into your terps. Now, your ratio of oil to terps should be about 10%, give or take, 5 to 10%. You don't need a lot of oil, just enough to return it, give it back its bonding properties. Now, obviously, as you can see, it's extremely watery, and that's what you want. You can have it a little thicker, you can have it a little thinner. It's totally up to you. Now, if you're doing this in acrylic, of course, then you don't need any oil. It's just a case of putting it in water and letting it dissolve. Okay. Very watery, as you can see. Right, so now we're going to put aside the drawing table and bring in the canvas. Okay, so here I've got a brand new canvas, just popping the plastic at the back. I'm just using a small little canvas. I don't often paint small, I paint quite large, but of course for these little demos, small canvases are dead right. Now, with a nice runny mixture, you can get all sorts of wonderful effects. These runs that you get can really, now if you're working on an easel and you get rivulets running down, it's obviously much easier. But these runs that you get can create such lovely effects. Now, as you can see, I've got a very watery consistency here, but I could put a stronger mix with a little bit more paint. And it's as simple as that. In this case, I'm not doing anything fancy with my Imprimatura layer. Literally just coating the canvas. Now, why do we need an Imprimatura layer? Well, there's a number of reasons. As I was discussing in an earlier video, you want to break the white of your canvas. It's quite daunting to paint on a white canvas, and once you've got a layer of color on your canvas, it's no longer quite so daunting, and it is also easier to paint on. It's much easier to paint on a canvas. The feel of the brush on the canvas seems to be smoother almost when you've got an Imprimatura layer down. Now, there's a couple of things you can do with this. You can splash other colors into it. One of the things that I love to do is wait until my Imprimatura layer is just a little bit dry, maybe give it half an hour or so to dry a little bit, because this will dry quite quickly. And then come along with a little spray bottle with just plain terps into it and spray onto it little patches and let the rivulets run down, and it creates just some lovely effects. There's almost anything you can do, and it can be great fun, and it can add enormous amount of quality to your finished product. Okay, I went away and mixed a slightly stronger version of the same Viridian green that I was using. I've just put a little bit more paint into it. As you can see, we've got a stronger color here. I'm just trying to simulate what one would maybe do in an actual painting. How much fun is this? Okay, I think that should be enough. I'm doing a Jackson Pollock here. Me who doesn't like Jackson Pollock. Right, now I'm going to go away and have a cup of tea. I'm going to let this rest a little bit, and then I'm going to come back and spray it with some terps, and let's see what we get out of this. Okay, I'm back, and we're going to have some fun with this Imprimatura layer. I've let it sit for a little while, maybe 10 minutes or so. It's obviously nowhere near being dry, but it's nice and settled now. Before I carry on though, I just want to talk to you about an Imprimatura layer for a painting that you're going to cover the canvas. You're not going to want to do your Imprimatura layer A, mixed just with oil, and B, paint coming straight out of the tube. The reason for that is if you lay down too much paint in your earlier layers, you have a lot less options. If you add oil to your paint, you're going to be breaking your lean to fat rule. So you don't want to put down too much paint either way in the beginning. You want a relatively thin coat. You can have your paint color stronger than what I've got here, of course, but it must be a watery mixture more so than an oily mixture. You want it to be quite fluid. So now what I'm going to do, as you can see, I've got a little spray bottle here with some terps in it, and we're going to have a bit of fun. Now when you do this, please make sure you're in a well ventilated room, because it's a little bit hard on your lungs. And just get this going. Now how cool is that? You can get such lacquer effects by doing this. You can of course take your brush and pour thicker color over it. You can let's do that. You can put strong terps marks on it where it takes it right down. Now once it gets to a point where you think, okay, that's quite cool, then you're going to lie it flat. Now I've got a slanted table in here, but I would now take, if I didn't want it to get any more runny than this, I'll take that lie it flat so that it didn't run any more than this. And if you wanted to create patches of color that are not runny rivulets, so to speak, then you would do it on a flat surface in the first place anyway. Now once you've done your Imprimatura layer and you've let it dry, you can go ahead and do your plotting out of your painting on top of this with a brush and a bit of paint, or with a pencil or piece of charcoal, whichever. You can also do your plotting out before you do your Imprimatura layer, and if you do that, then you need to go ahead and fix it with some artist fixative first before you do your Imprimatura layer. Because unless of course you're doing it with paint. If you're doing it with paint, it's not a problem, you just let that dry. But if you're doing it with charcoal or pencil, you need to seal that first, otherwise your terps is actually going to dissolve your charcoal or pencil and wipe it off your painting. I like to do it this way. It's just I like to not have something that's going to affect my Imprimatura layer psychologically, and so I will do my Imprimatura layer first and then go ahead and plot out my drawing afterwards. Except in the case of the violinist. The violinist, I plotted out his face first because I didn't want the blue area, I didn't want the blue Imprimatura color to cover his face because I didn't want the cool undertones underneath his flesh. So in that case, yes, I did plot him in first, and then I avoided his face when I put all the blue on and came back, and the underlayer color that I used for his face was a very light flesh color because I wanted to complement it rather than actually use an opposite color. Using an opposite color is a really nice way to do it as well, because using an opposite color can create a bit of juxtaposition. And for example, if you're doing a very yellow painting, you can use purple as your underpainting because that's the opposite side of the color wheel, and then you create this bit of juxtaposition where you have these minute little areas of the purple that will be shining through, and it just makes your yellow look a lot brighter. It's a visual effect that you can create. So there's lots that you can do with your underpainting or your Imprimatura layer. I have one of my art students at the moment that is doing a series of flowers on a black background, and she's actually doing her black background as the Imprimatura layer and then painting the flowers just on top of that, and she's doing it while it's still wet. And the paint that the black that she's mixing, she's doing one that's got a lot of viridian in it, so it's a very green black, and then she's got another one that's a very red black, and she's mixing all of this on the canvas and then going ahead and painting while it is still wet, and then all these colors come through into the paint that she's busy painting with for the colors of the flowers. So it's a very versatile, you can make your underpainting very versatile. It's either just to coat the canvas, or it becomes part of the composition, or it becomes part of the colors. It's up to you. Artists, I hope you've learned something from this little Imprimatura tutorial. If you have, please share it, subscribe to my YouTube channel, and like, and all the rest of the social media stuff. Thanks very much for joining me, and we will see you in day 18. Bye bye.
That's what you want to do.